Do you remember the TV movies from the 1980s that were so shocking, so controversial, they practically disappeared? The ones that aired once, rattled the nation, and then, quietly, were pulled, buried, or lost to time. In this video, we're revisiting 15 of the most controversial 1980s TV movies. Each one tells a story not only about what we watched, but who we were and what we were afraid to face. Let's start where the decade's innocence ended, with nuclear fire. 1. The Day After, 1983.
1 millisecond takes you beyond imagining, beyond tomorrow, and into the day after.
If you were there, you remember the fear. You remember how still the room felt. This wasn't a sci-fi spectacle. It looked like news footage. The Day After showed what would happen if the unthinkable occurred, a Soviet nuclear strike on the American heartland. The story followed ordinary people in Kansas City, farmers, teachers, kids, trying to survive when the sky itself turned to ash. Director Nicholas Meyer didn't flinch. He showed burned skin, silent screams, mothers clutching children as radiation spread. The music was sparse, just that quiet, post-apocalyptic wind. At the time, no one had ever seen something like it on television. The Cold War was still humming beneath every headline, and this movie threw gasoline on the anxiety. Over 100 million people watched it live, one of the most watched programs in history. ABC had psychologists on standby for the public afterward. Even President Reagan watched, and his diary entry later hinted it shook him deeply, influencing his arms control policies. And yet, it was too much. After the broadcast, it was rarely shown again. Teachers used it in classrooms. Preachers warned against it from pulpits. It wasn't deleted exactly, but it vanished from the airwaves for years, whispered about like something dangerous. Do you remember where you were when you first saw that flash on the screen? Now imagine just a few months later turning on the TV and thinking, is this real? 2. Special Bulletin, 1983.
Looting was widespread as the city emptied out.
It began like a regular newscast, a breaking story, reporters fumbling through updates. A terrorist group had seized a harbor in Charleston, South Carolina. They claimed to have built a homemade nuclear bomb. The anchors switched from field reporters to shaky live feeds, voices tense and cracking. Then came the explosion. NBC didn't mark it as fiction right away. The filmmakers wanted to feel like you were inside the chaos of a live news event. It worked too well. People called police stations in panic. News outlets received angry letters from viewers who thought they were watching a real act of terror unfold on American soil. In the early 80s, with Cold War paranoia running high, the realism hit like a punch. NBC eventually inserted disclaimers mid-broadcast, but the damage was done. Parents were furious. Congress even discussed whether networks needed stricter fiction labeling rules. The movie itself was brilliant, innovative, raw, ahead of its time. It won Emmys for writing and directing, but because of the uproar, it was shelved for years, barely rerun, practically erased from rotation. It's strange, isn't it? A movie about nuclear fear that caused real fear. In a world without the internet, misinformation wasn't a tweet, it was your own TV. Can you picture your living room that night? Those faces frozen, your own reflection flickering on the glass, wondering for a split second, is this really happening? And then, as if America hadn't already had enough trauma for 1 year, NBC did something even more shocking. It took a real tragedy, one that had unfolded in the headlines just 2 years earlier, and turned it into a story that would change how the nation saw its children. 3. Adam, 1983.
Go to the nearest salesperson so you can find your way back to your mother. Your mother is waiting for you, Adam.
You can still hear that soft, somber voice in the promos. Tonight, a story that will touch every parent in America. Adam told the story of Adam Walsh, the 6-year-old boy abducted from a Sears department store in Florida, later found murdered. His father, John Walsh, poured his grief into activism, and this film followed that journey. His rage, his helplessness, and the birth of the missing children movement. The acting was painfully human. Daniel J. Travanti as John Walsh wasn't a hero. He was broken, desperate, consumed by guilt. Jo Beth Williams as Adam's mother captured that hollow exhaustion of a parent who still leaves the porch light on, just in case. NBC blurred the line between drama and crusade. At the end of the broadcast, they displayed a toll-free number for missing children. Millions of calls flooded in. The movie didn't just tell a story, it changed laws, led to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and made Adam's face one of the most recognizable in America. But it was controversial. Some parents called it exploitation of grief. Others said it was too graphic, too soon, too real for prime time. There were complaints about showing a child's death at all all. Yet for many, it was a mirror of their deepest fear, losing a child in a world that suddenly felt unsafe. It's rare to say a television movie saved lives, but Adam might have. And still, because of that raw emotion, networks avoided reruns for years. It felt sacred, untouchable. Do you remember the first time you saw that milk carton? Adam's face printed beside the words, "Have you seen me?" 4. Something About Amelia, 1984.
Don't you think she's a little bit too young to start going out on dates?
No, as a matter of fact, I think it's about time.
You might remember Ted Danson then, not as the smooth bartender from Cheers, but as a father sitting on the edge of his daughter's bed. His face pale, trembling, destroyed by a truth he could no longer bury. The movie was about incest, a father abusing his own child. No euphemisms, no cutaways, just silence, confession, and the unbearable tension of what a family looks like when it collapses under shame. It aired on a Sunday night, and if you were in a house with kids, you remember that tension, parents glancing at each other, deciding whether to change the channel. But you didn't, because this wasn't titillation, it was confrontation. Director Randa Haynes filmed it with a kind of quiet that made every sound hurt. The creak of a floorboard, the hum of a refrigerator, the pause before someone said, "We need to talk." Glenn Close, as the mother, carried grief in her posture alone, and Roxana Zal, only 14, gave a performance that made the country stop breathing. ABC's phone lines crashed that night with calls from viewers who didn't know what to do, parents who saw their own children differently, victims who finally felt seen. It was raw, it was honest, and it was terrifying. It won Emmys, of course, but that was beside the point. Something About Amelia wasn't just a TV movie, it was a societal wound reopened on camera, and after it aired, it vanished from reruns. Networks quietly shelved it, afraid to show it again. Even now, it's rarely broadcast. Too intimate, too truthful. And maybe that's why it mattered. Because sometimes you have to see something that hurts to realize you're not alone. Tell me, when's the last time a TV show made you uncomfortable in the right way? If Amelia forced America to look inward, the next one set it on fire, literally. 5. The Burning Bed, 1984.
And you got the gasoline out of the garage and you came back into the house, right? And you poured the gasoline around the bed.
The title alone was shocking, but if you remember that opening scene, Farrah Fawcett's eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, bruises blooming beneath her makeup, you know why this movie seared itself into history. It told the true story of Francine Hughes, a woman beaten for years by her husband. She called the police. She begged for help. Nobody came. So one night, when he fell asleep drunk, she poured gasoline around the bed and lit a match. What followed wasn't just about crime. It was about justice, or the lack of it. Director Robert Greenwald filmed the abuse scenes with a restraint that somehow made them even harder to watch. You heard the slap, you heard the silence after, and you felt every ounce of humiliation Farrah carried in her trembling hands. It wasn't a fantasy of revenge. It was survival told in whispers and sirens. Viewers watched, stunned. Some applauded her courage, others condemned the movie for promoting vigilantism. Sponsors hesitated, ministers denounced it from pulpits. But women across America, women who'd never had a voice, started calling shelters, asking for help. Within months, domestic violence hotlines reported a surge in calls. The Burning Bed became more than a movie, it became evidence. Lawyers referenced it in court cases. Activists used it as proof that silence kills. Farrah Fawcett, once the poster girl of glossy American beauty, had become the face of a national reckoning. And just like that, the rules of television had changed again. It's strange, isn't it? How something filmed on a set with lights and cameras could ignite conversations that had been smothered for decades. Did you ever watch it with someone you loved and feel that tightness in your chest, realizing just how easily pain hides in plain sight? If The Burning Bed was fire, the next one was ice. 6. Fatal Vision, 1984.
They're dead, Mom. All of them. Oh, God.
A true crime miniseries that dared to make villains out of heroes. It told the story of Jeffrey McDonald, the former Green Beret doctor accused of murdering his wife and daughters in 1970. The public had followed his trial for years, divided over his guilt. When NBC aired Fatal Vision, starring Gary Cole as McDonald, it reignited every wound the case had left open. The production was meticulous, military precision in the courtroom scenes, sterile lighting that made everything look too clean, too perfect. And then there were the flashbacks, blood smeared across white sheets, children's toys half lit by the glow of police cameras. The horror wasn't gratuitous, it was methodical. Based on Joe McGinnis's best-selling book, the film made a definitive statement. McDonald was guilty, but in real life, the man was still proclaiming innocence from prison. After the broadcast, he sued the author and the network for defamation, accusing them of bias and betrayal. The lawsuits dragged on, and the ethics of true crime storytelling were suddenly in question. Was it right to dramatize ongoing pain, to make entertainment from tragedy? NBC had ratings through the roof, but it came at a cost. Viewers questioning what truth really means means when TV starts telling the story for you. If Amelia exposed private shame and the burning bed demanded justice, Fatal Vision warned us about something else, the seductive power of narrative. Because when you put something on TV, people believe it, and sometimes belief is the most dangerous weapon of all. You can almost see it now, that blue NBC peacock spinning up, the grainy static fading into a courtroom, and somewhere in America, a family sitting silently, absorbing it all, feeling that uneasy mix of fascination and dread. 3 movies in 1 year, 3 blows to the illusion that television was harmless: incest, domestic violence, murder. The screen wasn't a window anymore, it was a mirror, and America didn't always like what it saw staring back. Tell me, when's the last time you saw a story so honest it made you look away, but you couldn't stop thinking about it afterward? Because that was 1984, the year TV stopped pretending to be safe. 7. An early frost. 1985.
Yeah, here, don't forget your change.
You might remember the way it opened. Soft piano, a quiet Chicago apartment, and Aidan Quinn sitting by the window, his face pale, his breath visible in the morning light. He plays Michael Pearson, a successful young lawyer who has to tell his family he's gay and that he's dying of AIDS. That moment, when he finally says the words, is burned into the memory of anyone who saw it. His mother, played by Gina Rowlands, goes silent. His father, Ben Gazzara, turns away. The camera doesn't move. It just waits. The silence says more than any speech could. This was the first major network movie to tackle AIDS head-on. No metaphors, no safe distance. In 1985, when fear and misinformation ruled the headlines, an early frost broke the silence. Advertisers pulled out. Some affiliates refused to air it. Religious groups protested, saying NBC was promoting homosexuality. But when the credits rolled, something had shifted. It wasn't just the story, it was the empathy. The camera didn't look down on Michael, it stood with him. And for millions watching, that was the first time they saw an AIDS patient not as a headline, but as a son. It won Emmys, yes. But more than that, it taught compassion on a scale no public service campaign ever could. You remember the sound of it, don't you? That quiet hum of the VCR as you hit stop, sitting there staring at the black screen, unsure what to feel. If an early frost made America look inward, the next one forced it to face what it wanted to forget, the color of fear. 8. The Atlanta child murders.
You trying to tell me this is Yusuf? This ain't Yusuf.
1985. If you grew up in the South, the title alone brings a lump to your throat. Between 1979 and 1981, dozens of black children were murdered in Atlanta. For years, families begged for answers. When CBS turned it into a miniseries starring James Earl Jones and Morgan Freeman, the wounds were still open. The show didn't shy away. It showed mothers clutching photographs, reporters chasing rumors, police fumbling in the dark. It wasn't sensational, it was relentless. The air in every scene felt heavy with humidity and grief. But what made it controversial wasn't the violence, it was the implication. The miniseries suggested the murders might have gone deeper than the official story, that racial bias, political pressure, and institutional failure had played a role. Some scenes hinted at KKK involvement, others questioned whether Wayne Williams, the man convicted, had really acted alone. City officials condemned it. Some families were outraged, saying it exploited their pain. Others defended it, saying it told the truth nobody else would. The debate spilled out of TV rooms and into classrooms, churches, and barbershops. For 2 nights, America looked straight at a truth it preferred to ignore, that race, justice, and power weren't separate stories. They were the same story. And then, like so many of these films, it faded away. You rarely see it rebroadcast. It lingers more as a memory than as a movie. But if you close your eyes, you can still hear that single haunting note from the soundtrack, the one that played over the final montage of missing children. Do you remember how it felt when a film didn't just entertain you, but made you ashamed for what your country had ignored? And then came the one that flipped the conversation entirely, turning vulnerability into revelation. 9. The Rape of Richard Beck, 1985.
Where is she? Still in the phone booth. Well, she said she was.
The title alone was enough to make people stop scrolling their TV dials. Richard Crenna played Beck, a hard-nosed macho cop who mocked victims of sexual assault until it happened to him. He's attacked by 2 men, left broken and humiliated, and for the rest of the film, he has to confront what no one ever prepared him for. How a man survives being raped in a culture that refuses to believe it can happen. It was unthinkable subject matter for network television. In 1985, male sexual assault wasn't discussed. Not in newsrooms, not in classrooms, not in living rooms. ABC knew it was taking a risk, but the filmmakers leaned into the discomfort. They stripped away the glamour and gave you quiet, claustrophobic realism. The sound of a locker room echoing, the hum of fluorescent lights in a police station, the silence of a man who can't speak his own trauma. Richard Crenna's performance was devastating. He went from arrogance to emptiness in the span of 90 minutes. The film asked questions most viewers didn't want to answer. What does justice look like when you've mocked it your whole life? What does strength mean when the world won't let you be weak? It won a Golden Globe, but that didn't soften the blow. Many stations hesitated to rerun it. Some viewers called it disgusting, others called it necessary. Years later, it would be cited as one of the first serious attempts by American TV to talk about male vulnerability. If An Early Frost gave voice to the voiceless, The Rape of Richard Beck forced empathy where there had only been judgment. Both made audiences uncomfortable, and that was exactly the point. By the time 1986 arrived, something had shifted in the air. You could feel it, not just in headlines or politics, but in living rooms. The optimism of the early 80s had curdled into a quiet unease. The country had begun to realize that the monsters on the screen weren't always make-believe. And then NBC introduced one that felt almost too real to watch. 10. The Deliberate Stranger.
What have you been up to, Dick? Well, deadlines and headlines.
1986. You remember how calm he seemed, don't you? The handsome smile, the soft-spoken voice, the neat hair that made him look like he belonged in your neighborhood. Not on the FBI's most wanted list. Mark Harmon, America's golden boy, playing Ted Bundy. The story didn't open with blood or screams. It opened with charm. That was the trick. Bundy wasn't a shadow lurking in alleys. He was the man helping you carry your groceries. The film captured that contradiction with unnerving precision. Bright daylight, crowded college campuses, laughter echoing in the background, and then the quiet moments of horror. NBC knew exactly what it was doing. The network had followed the Bundy trial for years, and when it aired, The Deliberate Stranger, the real Bundy, was still facing execution. It wasn't just a movie, it was a national spectacle, but controversy erupted instantly. Feminist groups protested, accusing NBC of romanticizing a serial killer. Victims' families said the film turned tragedy into ratings bait. Critics pointed out that Harmon's clean-cut looks made Bundy seem sympathetic, a handsome monster at a time when women were still being told to stay home after dark. Still, millions tuned in. The film's power wasn't in gore, it was in suggestion. The empty parking lot, the creak of a car door, the sound of a key turning in a lock. Director Marvin J. Chomsky made horror out of banality, because that's what Bundy really was, the evil that hides behind a smile. When the credits rolled, America was left with a strange discomfort. We wanted to look away, but we couldn't. Maybe because deep down, we knew the real terror wasn't the killer, it was how normal he looked. Do you remember how you felt the first time you realized a villain could look like someone you might trust? But NBC wasn't finished testing its audience, because the next year, the same network that showed us a killer decided to show us what would happen if our entire country fell to one. 11. America, 1987.
You're lucky it was a border guard. He got an attention span of about 5 minutes.
Even the name felt dangerous, a 14-hour miniseries that asked what if the United States lost the Cold War. You probably remember the ads. Grim gray skies, Soviet flags fluttering over the Lincoln Memorial. Chris Christopherson's voice saying, "Ashurst, the year is 1997. The United States no longer exists." It was a vision of total surrender, an America occupied by Soviet forces after a bloodless coup. Schools replaced the Pledge of Allegiance with state loyalty oaths. News anchors mouthed propaganda. Citizens learned to smile while being watched. It wasn't science fiction, it was fear, filmed in widescreen. ABC poured nearly $40 million into it, one of the most expensive miniseries ever made. And when it aired, the backlash was immediate. The United Nations protested after seeing their logo used in a scene showing collaboration with Soviet occupiers. Critics called it jingoistic, paranoid, manipulative. Politicians warned it could inflame tensions just as nuclear negotiations were finally easing. But for many viewers, that was the point. America wasn't subtle, it was a nightmare painted in red and gray. Christopherson played a defeated American who slowly rediscovers his courage, trying to spark a rebellion in a nation that had forgotten how to fight. Mariel Hemingway played a teacher struggling to protect her students from indoctrination. Sam Neill, eerily calm as a Soviet administrator, gave the movie its most haunting line: "You Americans will destroy yourselves long before we ever could." It aired over 7 nights, a week of paranoia and patriotism wrapped in commercials for Budweiser and Chevy trucks. And when it ended, nobody agreed on what they'd just seen. Some called it propaganda, others called it prophecy. ABC quietly buried it afterward. The tapes were expensive, the runtime excessive. It was almost impossible to rerun. You can find fragments online now, grainy VHS rips, recorded off-air by someone who must have known they were witnessing something that wouldn't last. But the strangest part, for all its heavy-handed politics, America touched something deeply personal: the fear of losing identity, of waking up one day and realizing your flag, your language, your freedom were all gone, replaced by silence. You could almost feel that dread seep into living rooms across the country. The thought that the war outside might already be happening, quietly, in the mind. By the late 80s, television had learned how to shock you, how to make you cry, even how to scare you. But the next wave wasn't about fear or outrage. It was about what happens when stories cross a line so profound that they disappear. Let's start with a woman who refused to die quietly. 12. Right to Die, 1987.
Hi.
Hi.
If you ever saw it, you remember that hospital room, the hiss of oxygen, the fluorescent light flickering against sterile white walls. Raquel Welch, who the world had once seen as pure glamour, sat in that bed, paralyzed, her voice failing, her eyes still fierce. She played Emily Bauer, a woman with ALS who wanted the one thing the law wouldn't let her have, the right to end her life. In 1987, euthanasia wasn't something you talked about on television. It was something whispered about in hospital corridors, in family arguments, behind closed doors. But NBC went there. They showed the day-to-day horror of losing control of your body, the fork that trembled in her hand, the way her husband tried to smile while spoon-feeding her, the way her mother prayed instead of listening. It wasn't sensational, it was suffocatingly real. The sound design alone was haunting. Machines breathing for her, the slow beep of the monitor like a countdown. Welch delivered the performance of her career, fragile, defiant, human, but the controversy was instant. Disability rights groups protested, saying the film implied that disabled lives weren't worth living. Religious organizations condemned it for promoting suicide. Families wrote letters to NBC, some thanking them for honesty, others calling for the movie's removal. It wasn't deleted, but it might as well have been. Networks avoided reruns. For years, you couldn't find it anywhere. When it resurfaced decades later, it felt almost dangerous to watch, because Right to Die asked the question no one wanted on TV: who gets to decide when a life is complete? And that question leads almost inevitably to the next story, the one that actually was erased. 13. Superstar.
The stakes are high, but don't you worry. We're a real family here at
The Karen Carpenter Story, 1987. You could say you've seen it, but chances are you haven't. And if you have, it was probably in the corner of a grainy YouTube upload, flickering like an artifact from a parallel universe. Todd Haynes, then a film student, made something unlike anything else on television, a dramatization of Karen Carpenter's struggle with anorexia, told entirely with Barbie dolls. It sounds absurd until you see it. The plastic perfection of those dolls, their frozen smiles cracking under flickering light, became the perfect metaphor for a woman suffocating under the pressure to be perfect. The film aired once on PBS, one night, and that was it. Because Haynes hadn't licensed the Carpenters' music, Richard Carpenter sued, furious that his sister's life had been portrayed without permission, with what he called disrespectful parody. And just like that, Superstar was gone, pulled from circulation, ordered destroyed. Every official copy vanished from libraries and archives. Only a handful of bootleg VHS tapes survived, passed hand to hand, whispered about among film students, screened secretly in midnight classes. But for those who saw it, it wasn't just shocking, it was haunting. You could hear Rainy Days and Mondays warping softly under the hiss of tape as Barbie Karen shrank thinner and thinner under the weight of expectation. You could feel the metaphor in your bones, the way America polished its stars until they cracked. It wasn't the nudity or violence that got this one deleted, it was truth. The kind of truth that cuts too close to what we worship. Perfection, control, the illusion that beauty means happiness. Every era has its ghost stories. Superstar is one of them. The 1980s, and maybe that's fitting because Karen Carpenter was already a ghost when we finally learned how to talk about eating disorders. Do you remember her voice? That pure, aching warmth? Now imagine it echoing from a VHS tape you're not supposed to own. That's Superstar. That's the one that truly disappeared. But the decade had one more fight left to stage, this time over the most divisive word in America, choice. 14. Roe vs. Wade, 1989.
You staying?
I thought maybe, yeah.
Well, I left the key.
The ads were cautious, the tone serious. Holly Hunter and Amy Madigan in a dramatization of the Supreme Court case that legalized abortion. Even saying the title out loud made people tense. NBC knew it was stepping into a minefield. Affiliates debated whether to air it. Sponsors backed out. Protesters gathered outside studios holding signs before it even premiered. But when it did, the reaction was electric. Hunter, fierce and trembling, played the lawyer fighting for a woman's right to control her body. Madigan embodied the opposing side. Moral certainty, religious conviction, the weight of belief. The film didn't mock either view. It just showed them, side by side, and that was enough to ignite chaos. In the final courtroom scenes, the camera lingered on the faces of women in the audience, some hopeful, some afraid. There was no victory music, no triumphant montage, just quiet, the kind that comes after an argument that will never really end. Anti-abortion groups boycotted NBC, accusing the network of propaganda. Religious leaders called it blasphemy. Pro-choice advocates called it courage. But the truth is, Roe vs. Wade wasn't about winning. It was about showing the cost of the fight. When it aired, the country was already divided. 35 years later, it still is. That's the eerie power of it, the way the dialogue still echoes today. By 1989, TV had covered nearly every kind of taboo: violence, rape, disease, faith, death. And just when you thought there were no lines left to cross, the next movie proved there was one more, a descent into darkness that brought the entire decade to a close. But before we go there, ask yourself, what does it say about a culture when its most honest stories are the ones it tries to erase? 15. The Case of the Hillside Stranglers, 1989.
We're in this thing together.
If you were there, you remember the unease, the fear of walking alone, the newspaper headlines about women found in the hills around LA. Two cousins, Angelo Buono and Kenneth Bianchi, had terrorized the city, their murders. A mix of cruelty and perversity that stunned even hardened detectives. NBC's miniseries dared to dramatize it. Richard Crenna played Detective Frank Salerno, a man chasing ghosts through neon streets. The camera lingered on the smallest details, the cigarette smoke curling in interrogation rooms, the scratch of pens against notepads, the weary eyes of cops who'd seen too much. It wasn't about shock value, it was about obsession, about how evil doesn't just live in alleys. It seeps into the people hunting it. But audiences were split. Some said it was too graphic, too soon. Victims' families protested, saying it turned suffering into spectacle. Feminist groups accused NBC of sensationalizing violence against women, yet others praised it for honesty, for showing what violence really looks like when the glamour is stripped away. Crenna, the same actor who'd once played a rape victim in The Rape of Richard Beck, gave one of his most haunted performances, his quiet exhaustion carrying more weight than any monologue could. The movie ended not with triumph, but with silence. The camera panned over the city lights, indifferent, endless. The same city where even then, new stories were beginning, new crimes, new fears. It was a fitting bookend for the decade. The 1980s had started with the fear of annihilation in The Day After, and ended with the fear of the neighbor next door. Both stories were about the same thing, how fragile safety really is. When The Case of the Hillside Stranglers aired, America wasn't the same country it had been 10 years earlier. The innocence of broadcast television had been burned away, replaced by something sharper, more self-aware. And maybe that's why these films still haunt us, because they weren't just stories, they were signals, each one a flicker on the screen warning us what was coming. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.